Today's Boostcast has a twist at the end, and it's all about helping companies rebound by getting their marketing strategy right to connect with their key customers. I'm joined by one of the most innovative marketers I've ever worked with, Mr. Rob Iles, who runs his own business now called Visionize. That specializes in helping CEOs come up with a strategy for what's next, not just the now. Towards the end of that interview, I thought I must get in touch with someone who is in the millennial generation. And so I called Conrad Paxton. Conrad has been a marketer for 6 years. He's worked with small startup businesses, helping them formulate a marketing strategy, and big global brands like Microsoft and Red Bull. Conrad now works with Proximo Spirits, which is a company juggling with half of its business doing unbelievably well in retail, and in on-trade sales, which is pubs, clubs, and restaurants, no business at all. Let's talk to two great marketers about how to rebound.
I want to set up my own thing, work with like-minded CEOs to really help change how business is done. And I think, and I'm pretty confident about this, that this dreadful experience we're all going through is going to accelerate some of those changes, mainly driven by the under 35s. And what we were trained in, we're now in our 50s, what we were trained in back in the day about having this kind of 18-month cycle, overly respectful view of hierarchy, all of that caution, whilst it was right at that time, is not right now. And I talk to a lot of young people in business, and they say the big issue is how we do business. We like it to be conversational, stress-free. We have a mutual respect. It's actually not dissimilar about how we communicate outside of work. If it can become one and the same, then I think it removes any of this awkwardness, tension, false fear, and we can then deliver better. And I think that would be a massive, massive goal to achieve. And I think some bright CEOs are beginning to think about this. One of our clients, Kelloggs, I've noticed they've extended their summer hours. So they give the teams half days off on Friday, and they're extending that into the winter because they recognize that they need to be more flexible to give and empower their teams to be more creative and give back. And I think that's one example of a very big brand that is adapting, and there are lots more. So I'm quite hopeful.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. And I am going to come back to the point you made about the under 35s. I think the term is millennials. You have a millennial jury that sources lots of insight in terms of how that generation thinks. I'm going to come back to that because I'd love to unpeel that one. But before we do, I read a blog of yours at the beginning of the pandemic, and I think you called it 7 phases of this situation of COVID. And the first 4 were all about coming to terms with, acceptance and things like that. And I think the 4th phase was frustration, and that we're ready to come out now of that phase, and we're into phase 5, and that's Reentry. So can you tell me about the next 3 phases, so relevant for everyone now?
Yeah, and I think it's important that everyone knows that the last 2 months, probably, we have been adjusting to something none of us were prepared for. And there are lots of businesses that have been able to pivot and adapt better than others. And I've seen some great examples. But in my mind, in my business world, I knew that I couldn't really sell or communicate about the future while we were coming to terms with, in an understandably somber way, the realities of the crisis. And I noticed that really this frustration phase was going to go on probably till about mid-May, where we're at now. The last 3 phases, you very neatly, I have to say, you're written up on that orange board behind you, and thank you, is now is the time to start thinking about how we re-enter. And in my mind, I've thought about this. I think the landscape is going to change. I've talked about that. There's a lot of data already in some of the researchers. The consumer expectations will change. How we work will change. what expectations our employees will change. Our clients will change. Brands will change. The expectations of brands will change from consumers. The emphasis will be more around the societal value rather than the convenience of the product solution. So all of those things, I think, will mean that businesses fall into three areas. And I think the first is those that will literally struggle and fail. They're either going to give up or they're just not going to be right for the future. I really hope that's not a lot of businesses. The second, I think, is the businesses that will return, and there will be recidivation. There will be a return to the behaviors of the past, and they will continue to struggle, but they'll find it harder than before they actually joined, and they were struggling before. And it sounds harsh, but I think those are businesses that have struggled with change. They're in declining markets. They haven't adapted to the new needs of the new landscape, and I think they will struggle. And then I think the third element is about businesses where CEOs have a vision, where they understand the landscape's changed, they need to adapt. And actually, you've seen a hell of a lot of that. And I'm sure you have within your network, some amazing changes of direction and positioning, and not putting profit first, putting people first. And I think those are the three areas of business. And I think in terms of what will be at the fore, and I've seen quite a lot of research in the last couple of weeks about this. Salesforce have done some good research around, what are the needs of people. Deloitte did a good piece of research about the power of brand and where brands are going to attract people. It does boil down to the same thing, which is, I think, the values of the brand or the company you work for and the tone. And I generally think if you've got those right coming out of this, you stand a real chance of being relevant and meaningful in the new landscape. And tone and values are things in marketing that have been talked about for years, as you know. And I do think a lot of boards have dismissed them as the preserve of marketeers. I think now they are beginning to see them as true, valuable, authentic elements of a business.
And Rob, I'd love to give an example. You mentioned Kellogg's as being an enlightened business. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who happens to work with Sky, and we were chatting about how is that business reacting. And she said, amazingly, she said, anyone who is a carer, so a parent who is looking after children or their parents, for example, has been given an extra 10 days just to do that.
Yeah.
And I compare that with other companies that I know who are saying, take your holiday now, so that when we get back out there, we don't have to lose you on holiday. And that's a completely different value set driving those kind of decisions.
100%. And I don't think it's just about young people. I think it's also about people who can recognize that some of those procedures and practices were born out of the wrong agenda. And I think they now in their 50s in senior positions are recognizing that that's just not going to cut it going forward. And I think they can see the other thing about this. I wrote a kind of very quick post on LinkedIn last week, and I've been blown away by the reaction to it. I think it's had something like 32,000 views. And it was just a comment. I mean, I know that Gary Vee talks about vanity measures. I get a bit, what does that mean? But the reality of it is that it shows people, it's chimed with people. And that was all about the three things CEOs have learned through this crisis. And all-day board meetings are not necessarily efficient or necessary going forward. How we work, it has to change. And also having rules around home working based on lack of trust is just not right. And I think all the evidence shows, and it has done for a long time, and now people are actually seeing it, they believe it, that your work increases when you're working from home. People like you and I have known this for a long time because we've had to do it. Our danger is working too hard. You're getting the knock on the door from your son or your wife saying, you do need to come home. There's dinner's on the table. You're going to miss the program. It's 10 o'clock. And I think people are beginning to see that you're going to get a lot more from teams when they have the freedom to work in a more flexible way. So I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. And I think there's some great brands out there. But I, alas, to my earlier point, I do think there will be brands out there that haven't got that. And they're fearful. They think, I have to see my team for them to perform.
Yeah, do you know, it's so interesting what triggered when you were sharing that, Rob. I read a brilliant article by Matthew Said in the Sunday Times, where he talked about your point about meetings. And he said there's a dynamic called the HIPPO, HIPPO, the highest positional powers opinion drives the entire meeting. So this sort of hierarchical stuff that just gets in the way of efficiency and getting stuff done correctly and value-based decision-making. So there's a fundamental change that is required, and maybe that is a positive that comes out of the pandemic, that we behave much more values-based, more efficient. But also I want to now unlock a little bit, because you made the point earlier about under 35s. Tell me more about that in general, and help me understand how the Millennial Jury, which is one of the great products that you use, how could that help us right now?
Well, so there's there has been for a long time a use of the term millennials, and I kind of latched upon this about 6 years ago. And at the time, a lot of the CEOs I was talking to were literally thinking, yeah, I heard about this. This is marketing speak, and it's American, and it doesn't really mean anything. But millennials are now 35. I mean, there's some controversy over how you define it, but I basically have a view that 35 or 36 and under are millennials, and then anyone from 2000, although some marketers have kind of increased this, so they've got a more of a consumer to a bit older. But anyone, say, under the age of 20 is a Generation Z. These two generations are definitely influencing the way business is changing. They have done for a number of years. By
Rob, we've got children in that bracket, haven't we? We've got Generation Z at home with us.
Yeah,
and millennial in my case.
Yeah, no one that's actually working within my household yet, but in the workplace by 2025, the millennials and under will represent 75% of the global workforce. In certain countries, we're already there. And, you know, places like Africa, Nigeria is a good example. And in India, some of the states there have got 75% millennials. So what I've been working on through the Millennial Jury is tapping into their insights and understanding what their needs are for the food and drink and other sectors I work in. And then contrasting that with, we have something called the core jury, which is older consumers, and understanding the difference. And every time we run two parallel juries, the differences are massive. And one quick example from the world of food would be, we did some work with Waitrose on organic veg. Now, not one of the millennials understood what organic meant. They couldn't define it. They defined it in terms of organic means premium. It's another code for better made. They didn't understand it was actually about removal of pesticides through the process. Now, that's because they haven't been educated in that. Whereas in our generation, that was very much explained to us when it came about. And I think there are a number of examples where products you assume are well understood are being marketed at the wrong audience in the wrong way. And that allowed Waitrose to talk about the premium nature and the quality of organic rather than just about its pesticides removal. So I think there are a number of examples. And I think what I'm really interested with this Millennial Jury at the moment, and we've also created a new brand called the New Gen Jury, so we can encompass Generation Z, is actually around ways of working. It's not so much about consumption patterns, it's about ways of working, how we go about our lives. And I think that's proving quite interesting to some people. And certainly coming out of this, we've moved those into online chat rooms so the juries can be done online. And what we're finding is people are saying, we prefer it to be done online. And it was your point earlier around not having this hierarchy, peer pressure in the room. As researchers, you do a good job in removing that, but it's still there. So actually, when it's online, people's voices are heard. And I do think this is all about and move on to another point around the millennials and younger people. When I talk to them within businesses, and I try and encourage CEOs to set up a kind of virtual millennial board, a younger person's team, so they have a voice and they have access to the senior team. What comes up time and time again is we want to do business differently. We don't want a hierarchy. We want to have a voice. If someone's quite shy or a bit intimidated and not the Roger Iles loudest voice in the room, then they have valuable opinions to give. Let's bring them out. And I think a whole generation of people are now at work that have been educated at school and encouraged by teachers to be more collaborative, to work in groups, to work as teams. And then you see, and I won't name the company, but I ran a parallel workshop with the board, senior leadership, and the millennials. And the millennials were far more natural at collaborating. There was no sexism, there was no talking over. There was no, as you said, the loudest voice in the room. There was none of that. Whereas I did see that in the board, and it was just there. It wasn't intentional. It was just habitual, and I think it's fascinating to see how this may influence how we do work going forward.
And Rob, I think this is important to share with everyone listening in. One of the things that the Millennial Jury does, or how you use it, the CEO comes up with a strategy or a new brand. You put it to the Millennial Jury and they give feedback. That's how it works, isn't it?
Well, but that's how it can work. And I would want, I've certainly worked with 3 or 4 CEOs who totally grasped that. And one CEO did a brilliant job, a guy called Andrew Hayes, and a shout out to him. He did a brilliant job in actually taking the advice of his millennials over his board. And I thought that was really, really a smart, clever guy who could see the value. And it wasn't about individuals. It was about, the mood and tone of where he wanted his business to be going.
So tell me about tone. You mentioned it earlier. You said the 2 things that we really need to be cognizant of, because consumers are, is tone and values.
Yeah.
We've talked about values. Tell me about tone. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by tone is, and it plays into the whole debate about workplace sexism, it plays into all of that as well. It is about how you go about your business, how you present your brand. It's not about pushing. It's about taking people with you. It's about stating what you do confidently and allowing people to come to you. Now, that's very hard when you have a desire to sell something and connect. But I think it's just as important. I think there's this blurring of the workplace and the home. And ironically, it comes that, well, we talk about workplace balance. I think a lot of young people are quite happy to navigate that themselves, as long as it's not all about stressful experiences at work and then relaxing and happy at home. Which, to be fair, it used to be. I think if you can create an atmosphere where the tone of your boss is the same as the tone of your partner, respectful, inquisitive, on the same level, then I think it's going to become a lot easier for especially younger people who are finding their way in the world. And that's tone for the workplace. I think tone is also important in the brand, how we present our conversations to our clients and our customers of the future. And I think there's a science to this, and it's been used very cleverly by brands for years. But I think it's becoming more mainstream now. And I do think there will be examples of really bad tone as much as there will be a very good tone.
That was really useful for me, Rob, because it helped me. We 4 years ago, we changed the name of our company and our business brand. How did we do that? Based on your advice at the time, I got a millennial jury together, or the equivalent of 25 20-year-olds. And I said, what should we call ourselves? And they said, and this took a while. We had two different meetings, and they said, Uspire. So the name Uspire comes from that group. And they said, it should be spelled USPRE, because it's about us and it's also about you. It's respecting the individual, but it's also collaborative. So it's you spire. Now, that's tone, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, because you're connecting. I mean, you've always been a great innovator in the way you work and you go about it. It's just instinctive for you. But I don't know if you read the Simon Sinek's novel, the famous one, Start With Why.
Yes.
Well, if in that he talks about the difference between the hows and the whys. Both are very important. But the whys are in a minority. The whys are in a minority. I have a belief that the whys will still not be in the majority, but they're increasing. And I think it's important that we look at that. And that's all to do with purpose, about why you would want to be in a company, what the company stands for. The rest follows. And I think tone comes into that. About, you read the story of Zappos, the famous online shoe company, and how they built a culture. All of these things, I think, have been, certainly in the food industry and in some of the areas you and I have worked in the past, they do seem a bit disconnected from their trading world. And I generally do think they're going to be more connected going. Every business will have to look at this and look to try and change to get the right people working for them. And I think it's exciting. And what I'm trying to do is help with that, help facilitate that. I am actually launching, sorry, I don't want to sound like one of these people coming on to flog a book, but I am actually launching a new part of our business, which is the virtual sales and marketing department. So for me, whilst I want to be meeting people directly, I do think a new world is more online, but it does offer businesses that don't have a marketing or sales team a kind of virtual solution that they tap into, almost like Netflix on a monthly basis, where they've got some advice constantly. They can switch it on and off if they need to, but it does mean that they don't need to have a big team of people that are tied down by corporate meetings, rules and regulations. They can be a bit more fleet of foot. Be interested to see how that works. But I generally think, I keep coming back to it, I used to sit in those board meetings all day long, listening to the egos and the normal sort of twos and fros, the loudest voices, the different agendas. I was confused about what we actually did. And I was thinking our competitor is out there connecting and selling with our customers and our clients while we're intellectualizing in this room with no reference points to what we actually do on the walls or in the, and I think that kind of approach is going to have to change.
Thank you, Rob. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of this Boostcast. I have one more question for you, but a reflection on what you just said. As a business, we are making sure every offering that is face-to-face as a learning company is also available online. And we're doing that right now so that our business can rebound, because we're then current, available and flexible like you described. How can you finish off for us, Rob, by sharing what are your top tips in the rebound phase? That, right, let's now launch and go beyond launch into rebound. What are your top tips to do that for everyone?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, it will be slightly different for each business sector. I think you can't not use this period of time, and we've had a lot of it already. So the 2 months, I know there's been some crisis management, but some of the clients that I'm working with during this have chosen to be a lot more forward thinking. So you should have, if you haven't already, you should have been preparing for that relaunch and rebound stage. And by doing that, it's about questioning what you have in the locker, what your assets are, and what your purpose is going forward. If your purpose is still the same, then you need to make sure you've communicated that properly to all your teams. You are totally in sync with your business. Everyone is very clear about the roles they're going to play. But I do think it's about tone and the presentation of your forward vision into a new landscape. I do think businesses need to understand that new landscape, adapt, but then share with people what they're doing. All the research keeps coming out that the highest priority at the moment is for brands to demonstrate what use they are for society. The whole thing around NHS has shown the country, and it doesn't surprise me, that there's history of the Brits doing this, but all of that well-being, that feeling, that wanting to connect, I think will continue through the business world. I know it sounds a bit naive, but I generally do believe that workplace will be better. I think profits won't be coming first for a period of time. Now, people have got to survive. Businesses have got to work. I think if you have had experiences in this lockdown that have connected you to different marketplaces, different communities, different experiences, I think you need to build on that and bring it to your brand and work. And one thing in the food and drink industry I'm very excited about is this localness. Now, that's been talked about as a trend for years, as you know, but I generally do believe if we can keep a percentage of what's gone local in terms of the investment in local businesses that have pivoted and offered deliveries and things like that, then I think it will be great for society. So I think all of those things are important, but you've got to really have a plan and know where you're going for the 3 to 5 years. And that involves your younger people. That would be my tip.
That's awesome, Rob. Thank you so much for your vision, for your passion, and for your time today. Conrad, thanks so much for taking this call at such short notice.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Mark. Good to be here.
And as I know you've been following the Boostcast, thank you very much. And we've today been talking specifically about the millennial generation. And what triggered in my brain, that's why I called you, was that's your generation. You're under 30. You've been in the business world about 6 years. I'd love to get your perspective. What are you thinking and feeling?
You know what? I mean, you see a lot about millennials in the news, and sometimes they get a bit of a bad rap, but I think we've had to be incredibly resilient. You know, we started our careers on the end of the last recession and financial crisis, and 5 years in, just as our careers are starting to take off, there's sort of an unprecedented pandemic, which again is doing a lot of at least short-term devastation to the economy. So for us, this is the only really world we've ever known work-wise. You just have to roll with the punches. And I think this is another one. I think this is probably going to be a bit more short-term in its impact. So although there is some harm going at the moment, I'm hopeful for the future. I'm being as resilient as possible, and you've just got to ride it out, really. You can't take it too personal. It's happening to everyone. It happens to have happened twice to us in the first 5-6 years of our career, but forward-looking, really. I'm looking forward to getting back to normal in a year or so. So
resilient, pragmatic. And what's your perspective about the way companies are behaving through this period?
I think there was a rush. And of course, look, you've got to be pragmatic. When something like this happens, budgets have to be cut, staff are on furlough, consumer habits are, of course, changing. But I think that's the huge opportunity there, as well as potential danger to companies. Thinking a lot recently that as marketers, you're constantly spinning plates. Sometimes you're putting out fires. You've got so many things on the go. You're doing a bit of everything. You're the master of almost everything in a lot of aspects of the business, especially in smaller companies that I've been involved with. And this is giving us a time to really inwardly focus that we don't normally get, even during a normal business planning cycle. You're planning the following year in about the summer before the financial year starts in January, but you're still running the brand plans that you planned the year before. So this is giving us a time to really, I think, focus on the fundamentals, which is very important. There's a bit of a reset, I think, that we're able to do, which I think is a great opportunity, which you don't often get as marketers. You really need to engage with what are the drivers of your business? What really make you successful? There's a lot of noise in marketing sometimes, and I think we're guilty of chasing the shiny object sometimes. A new piece of tech comes along, augmented reality. How do we get involved with that? But I think right now you've got to be really sharp. What really adds value to your business and for your customers, and really double down on those practices. And I think good marketers, we've been doing this already, and it might separate the good marketers from those who potentially aren't focusing on the really important fundamentals that they should be.
That's interesting, because Rob was just talking about the good companies being very separate from the companies that simply won't survive given current behaviors, not just that they're necessarily in a channel that isn't doing well. It's just they're not exhibiting values that will retain customers and consumers.
No, absolutely.
So talk to me about as a marketer now. You've been a marketer as a professional for about 6 years. Is that about right?
Yeah, coming up for that, mainly marketing. I got involved briefly in the commercial world. I think it's important to sort of really understand how the money is made within the company. I think you tend to sort of siloize yourself a little bit in your career. So I wanted to get involved in a little bit of a breadth of how my companies work, but predominantly marketing focus.
So as a marketer, what are you thinking now about brand and how to communicate with consumers in the current situation?
I think, there's a tendency that everyone wants to dive in, and what's happening at the moment. Everyone wants to produce adverts around COVID and coronavirus. I sort of get that. And if you've got the extra budget, I guess you can go ahead and do that. I don't really see those as long-term value drivers at all. I think brands are built on distinctive assets, distinctive positioning and personality, and you work your whole life as a marketer trying to build out the distinctive positioning, and suddenly everybody rushes in and puts out coronavirus memes with their brand logo on it. And I think that's very short-termist, especially when so I've worked at big companies, but also small companies. You just got to be so much sharper, I think, for your budget. So while there are short-term things you might need to do, for us, we're repositioning ourselves strategically and see what we can do to keep doubling down on our long-term value drivers and our real distinctive brand positioning. We've got a great collection of brands. And how do we keep these going, really, weather the storm, so to speak. But I don't really see long term too much changing. We've built our brands on certain values, and those should really be the core of everything that we do.
Yeah, that's great. And final question, Conrad, top tip for a new brand. So any brands that either have just launched or are just about to launch, how can you get traction in a marketplace that is like we have today?
It's incredibly tough, and unfortunate, and I really feel for these small brands, because there's a lot of brands out there who could have been potential future stars, and we all know small businesses live and die on cash flow, and this has come around an absolutely terrible time. So I think you just, and I keep harping on about it, but you've got to understand the fundamental value drivers for your business, and you double down on those. You don't get distracted by the noise. What's gonna add value, what's gonna support your consumers and your staff, and find these business fundamentals and just heavily invest in those, really.
Sounds great, Conrad. Thanks so much for me interrupting your day to have this Boostcast together. Thank you. It's awesome.
Be here. Thank you.